Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Hilary Stupa. I'm a developer with Qdabra software. Looking at the attendees list, I think everybody here knows me. So today we're going to talk briefly, or I'm going to talk briefly about our latest DBXL release. So what's new in DBXL 3.5? The first bullet here is the main reason we've released a new version. We found recently in a client's environment an issue with deleting or reshredding documents mapped with an identity column on Windows Server 2022 Datacenter Azure Edition. So obviously, that's a pretty big problem. If you were running this operating system with DBXL 3.4 and earlier versions, there were issues with deleting or reshredding. So if you tried to delete a document, it would fail. If you tried to resubmit a document with edits, it would fail silently. The clients we've had that have had this issue so far, they were the reason we found it, and they've been getting new installs prior to this release just to get a hot fix in place. But I just want to make sure everyone's aware that there is a potential bug with that operating system. That's one of the main reasons we're pushing out 3.5 right now, is to get that bug fixed. We have a couple other little changes. I've added some logic to the DBXL administration tool so that if you upload an XSN with a very different version, you get a warning. This is like Forms Viewer. It's probably familiar to those of you who use Forms Viewer when you've accidentally overwritten an XSN with the wrong one. The version warning can just be a helpful heads up. I've got a couple little bug fixes and changes in DBXL rendering. We don't return an error on certain situations with blank email addresses. I'll talk about that in a sec. And DBXL rendering has some new configuration options. The two that I think are most useful is the ability to skip sending email for specific document types, or to skip sending email for all document types, and we'll talk about why that's useful. There are also some additional settings for retrying in case of SMTP server errors. So if you happen to use a somewhat flaky SMTP server, it's nice to know that you can set up some retries, or if you have some heavy usage of email sending that occasionally causes your SMTP server to throw up its little hands in despair, right? So yeah, here's our bug fixes. We also saw this same bug with deleting and reshredding in SQL. The SQL Server instance is installed on an OS with Azure in the name, like the Datacenter Azure Edition OS, or if you're shredding to an Azure database, the older style individual databases, or a managed instance. So just kind of be aware of that. And then rendering used to return an error on a blank email address situation. So if you had a string like email address, semicolon, email address, and that happens sometimes when you're using a concat maybe to create a string of email addresses and you don't know for sure whether some of those are going to have a value in them. We used to get an error on that, and now we don't any longer. Obviously, you have to have like at least one recipient, or the email is not going to send. But I'll show you an XML that's a sample of what I mean. You can turn off email for one, more, or all document types, and determine an appropriate retry interval for the SMTP errors. We've got the DAT template checking feature, where we check first off to see if you're lower, if you're uploading an XSN that's a lower version, or if you're uploading an XSN that's an extremely different version. So this stuff isn't terribly interesting as theory. It's a lot more interesting in practice. So let me show you some of the things I'm talking about here as soon as I figure out how PowerPoint works, because it's always a new learning experience for me. Okay, so first I want to talk about this option to block mail, either for specific document types or for all document types. So line 30 here on my notepad instance, I'm just gonna see if I can zoom this in just a little bit, just in case it's tiny. All right, so line 30 here is the first one I'm talking about, where you can go ahead and not send email at all. The reason why this is useful to turn off being able to send email is you could have a situation where you have a number of document types. They're all set to email either when something's new or modified, and you have to re-import a bunch of them using the DBXL migration tool. It happens, and you don't want them all to send email. Now, one option you would have would be to go into the individual document types, go into the email mappings, and deselect both of these checkboxes, right? And then save it. And you'd have to do that for all of your email mappings. To me, that seems like kind of a giant sort of a pain. Like, why would I want to do that? And you might be thinking, perhaps I can just turn the service off. And the issue with that is turning the service off itself doesn't prevent the rendering documents from being created. So right now, my rendering service is off. I'm going to import some documents just to kind of mock up this idea of importing with the service off. And then now when I execute this, this is the Qt render unprocessed view over in the Qdabra utility database. And you can see I've got 3 items here. So right now the rendering service is off, but these are still waiting to be processed. And the minute I turn the rendering service back on, the emails are going to start flying. While I'm waiting for those emails to arrive, I am going to pop open here in just a second. I should have had it open already. A sample with that email string I was talking about, and it might take me just a minute to find the right one. I think I've only got 3 XML, so I think it shouldn't be too terrible to find. And I see my emails are coming in. So here, let me get these guys open. Not opening up as XML, that's fine. Here we go. Here's a sample of what I mean, and let's just change that to XML so it's more readable. Here's a sample of what I mean about blank email addresses. It used to be that when we split these strings, if you had something with semicolons and no email address, like the actual value in between the semicolons split was blank like this, you would get an error in your event log. And we don't, that doesn't happen any longer. We just go ahead and if it's blank, we don't send it. So here's a sample of that email, and you can see it's coming to my test mailinator accounts and to me. So that was that bug fix, and it was just one of those things that sort of had annoyed me. Okay, so as you can see, the reason why it's nice to have that option to be able to turn off emails is because if you just turn off the service, they are just lurking. They're just waiting there to get executed. And let me execute this correctly. And you can see now these are all gone. All these rows are gone. So our other option here, aside from turning off all email, is you can block email for specific document types. And you can have multiples, just semicolons separate them, or you can have a single. Now, one thing we have to do when we change the configuration here is we do have to stop and restart the service. So I'm going to save these changes. I'm going to turn this off. And then I'm going to save again because I'm neurotic. There we go. I know it was saved, but I'm like, all right. And so I'm going to go ahead and, pardon my quick little PowerShell script here to rename my files. You can see the migration tool checks and sees whether or not you've already uploaded documents. So sometimes when I'm doing demo or testing, I use PowerShell to rename my files so I can import them again without the migration tool fussing at me. Okay, so now when I run this time, the rendering documents actually won't even get created. And so it's not a matter of whether or not the service is on. So we can see this time, whoops, we can see I lied. The rendering documents do get created, but they don't send email. That is where my mistake was. So we can see they're going to come through here. They're going to each get processed. It runs every 15 seconds, but I will not get additional email from these. My last emails from these were at 8:13. It's now 8:15, and I'm not getting emails. I had forgotten for a minute how the code that I wrote actually worked, so my apologies there. Again, it does create them. It just doesn't actually send email on them. So you can block that way instead of having to necessarily change your document type email settings. And I just feel like that's something reasonably convenient. Okay, so that takes care of that. The SMTP retry stuff, hopefully the explanations here are reasonably clear. The default is false. You can turn on retrying on email exceptions so that if there is an SMTP exception returned when we're trying to email, in other words, if the SMTP server says, nope, nope, not going to send it, for whatever reason, you can turn this to true and it will try resending, okay? And you can determine how many times you want it to try to resend, 1, 2, 50. You can determine how long you want it to wait between attempts to resend. And if they should be exponential, you can set that there. If you want it to be 15 or 5-second wait, and then a 10-second wait, and then a 15-second wait, for example, you can set that there. However, the rendering service is going to try and do its retries before it starts sending another email. So that does cause a certain amount of delay. If you have kind of a high traffic system where you're sending a lot of emails, you just want to keep in mind that this can slow down email processing. However, if it's vital that those emails get out and you've had SMTP errors that aren't easily diagnosable or determined or fixed, then this might be a good way to go. So I just wanted to highlight that for everyone. The last thing I've got here to show you is what I mentioned about the version checking. So you can see here that this is form template version 1.0.4. Too many zeros. I've had a week of Mondays. So I'm going to pick a file that is a lower version and hit open, and you can see I get a prompt. It just says my form version is .1, which is lower than .4. Now it's still going to let me save it. You can still dismiss it. You can still do whatever thing you'd like to do here. It's just to let you know that, hey, look, perhaps something's not right. Perhaps you're uploading the wrong thing. This one's just slightly higher. It's .16 instead of .4. And you get a warning just saying it's significantly different. I use the same verbiage as Forms Viewer, so it's it should be familiar, you know. And the same thing here. We're just saying, look, we're not sure that you've got this in the right place. And again, you can just say okay, and you can save and just keep going. Or you can choose to not save, right? You can just hit refresh and say, whoops, I really didn't mean to do that, and be back to just where you were. So yeah, that was really it. There's not a huge amount of changes here. Like I said, we wanted to get this pushed out as soon as we figured out that we had a potentially blocking bug for a newer operating system. We wanted to make sure that didn't bite anybody. Does anybody have any questions at this time about anything? And if not, I am just really happy that everybody was able to make it. Let us know if we can help you get upgraded. I included that in the questionnaire at the end, but you also all know how to find me. Oh, I see there is a question. Is there a question from Chris? My questions. Oh, Chris says, I guess we need an upgrade. Maybe, Chris. I mean, I'm not sure what version of DBXL you're currently using, but we can help you. We can help you get upgraded. You know how to reach us, and we'll get you upgraded. Again, the bug affects only certain operating systems, and you can be using an Azure VM and not be using that particular operating system. So if it doesn't affect you and you don't need any of the new features, you know, maybe you're not going to be in as big of a hurry to upgrade this, but we're happy to help you. You know how to reach us. We're at support@qdabra.com. Qdabra Forms, my usual pay in the bills slide. Qdabra Forms, we're adding to it all the time. We're about to release 7.4, like minutes from now. It's super close. I think next week's webinar is on that, and Forms Designer has some new features and functionality as well. It's coming along nicely. So thank you everybody for coming. I know this was pretty short, but we just wanted to make sure you were all aware of the features and bug fixes. And again, reach out, let us know if you need a hand upgrading to 3.5. We're happy to help you with that. And yeah, let us know if there's anything we can do for you. Thanks so much and have a fabulous day.